You are listening to the Adapt Performance podcast, where we aim to make elite level strength and conditioning accessible to everybody. I'm your host, Jordan Webster, and let's get into the episode. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Adapt Performance podcast. So in this episode, I'm going to talk you through a question that has popped up quite a lot in my DMs, and it is, what are some of the most common mistakes that hobbyist combat sports athletes make with their training? And I'm going to dive straight into it. The first one that really catches people out is scheduling, right? Picking a weekly training schedule that is like super inappropriate for where they're at, what they can sustain over the long term, as well as just stuff that's like actually beneficial to your performance. So I'm going to dig into the scheduling issues and how I see this being done quite a lot, and just give you, some off the cuff bits of advice, a few stories that might just make this point hit home a little bit. Look, the first one is, chances are, okay, you're a hobbyist athlete, and you probably have a full-time job that is not related to your sport. Okay, so you leave the house early morning, you get back pretty much in the evening, you grab your training kit, grab a bit of food, go straight to the jiu-jitsu gym, the boxing gym, wherever you train, right? So as a result, life and time goes quick. You're probably thinking, fucking hell, with the amount of mat time I have, how am I meant to squeeze in like S&C? Like, what do I put in the 1 to 3 sessions per week that I can afford to actually get to the gym for 45 to an hour, right? I understand it. Like, it's challenging. Like, combat sports athletes don't get enough respect for how hard they work and how much stuff they actually need to manage in a training week. But we do need to figure it out. Like, let's not play the victim there. Let's actually make sure that we do this properly. Ultimately, we need to be very specific in terms of, look, where are we currently at from a training standpoint? Okay. And where are we trying to get to? What are our goals in the long term? And then we just need to fill in the gaps along the way. When I think about some of the things that athletes do wrong from a training schedule standpoint, I think one of the first things is intensity and fatigue management, right? Combat sports will batter you, okay? It will take it out of you. You'll be sore all the time. You're just going to feel pretty tired as a result, but it doesn't need to be like that. You can definitely have good periods within your week where you feel super fresh, and then you'll have periods in your week where you're like, I feel pretty battered today. I think that's normal, okay? However, what I want you to be thinking about from an intensity management standpoint is, a loose way of thinking about this is, if you was to map out your training week, right, and assign a color to it, right? Green is it's a super easy day, or it's a recovery day, or I'm not doing anything, right? So green is easy. Put that in, okay? That's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever, right? That could be drilling in jiu-jitsu. It could be that you do a bit of coaching, whatever. Amber or orange, right? It's a medium intensity day. I might do a few live rounds, but we're not doing very many. It's pretty easy. I can control the intensity a little bit. Maybe it's some pad work, but generally it's fine, right? There's that. And then you've got your red days. You've got your super high intensity days, the days which are like, fuck, I know I'm probably going to need a rest day tomorrow, or I know I'm not going to be firing on all cylinders. What I want you to do is take a look at your training week and give it a color, okay? Color code it as it currently sits, and just have a little look at it, okay? What does that tell you? We want to see a decent blend of green, amber, and red. We don't want to see it all red. If it's all red, that's an issue, because chances are you are just layering on fatigue, and injury risk to a point where you're probably not going to be on the mats for too much longer, or you're just wildly overcooking yourself to a point where you're probably just not performing to your max anyway. So have a look at your weekly training schedule. And what I would recommend is, if you have the ability to do so, see if you can reshuffle things a little bit. One of the things we do with our fighters is looking at their training week, and let's say the red sessions, the high priority sessions for us, are sparring, okay? Sparring is one of the most important sessions in a week for a fighter, a combat sports athlete. So you need to protect that, right? So as a quick example, ahead of a sparring day, what I would not recommend doing is going in the gym and doing 10 sets of 10 on squat, bench, deadlift, and then running a marathon, Why? Because obviously it's a fuckload of work. It's going to make you sore, and it's not going to be the right way of going about it. So how we actually prepare for a sparring session or a high intensity session is having a lower intensity day the day before. So ideally a green day, which might be a rest. It might be a low intensity cardio day to work on some conditioning or, recovery or a bit of drilling, right? You could potentially get away with some amber sessions before a sparring session, but let's think about like modulating that intensity a little bit so that you're not detracting from the most important thing, which is the sparring, your ability to actually put together good rounds, right? So that's something to think about. Is look at your training week, okay, and see if you can rejig some things. Because what we don't want to see is green, 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 red, 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 okay? Because by the time you get to that third red session in a row, you're playing with fire, right? So thinking about that from an intensity management standpoint. And what you'll start to see is your skill work will feel amazing because you'll be fresh on the days that you want to be fresh. You'll start to notice that your injury risk and, the amount of little injuries that you pick up are just going to start to like whittle away. You're not going to get as many of those, and you'll just start to see that your progress happens so much quicker. It just makes sense, right? Look, and you won't be able to do it perfectly all the time because look, life is like that. Sometimes you're restricted, class timetables, that type of thing. So you want to think about your intensity and your fatigue management as much as possible and making sure that your week makes sense. Okay. That's one of the biggest things that I feel like people get wrong. The second thing within scheduling issues is just picking a program that is just not appropriate for your goals as a combat sports athlete. So, just kind of put this out there. If I was going to say to you, right, we're trying to create an athlete that really values speed, high intensity conditioning, ability to recover between rounds, strength, can move in a variety of ways, okay, which is pretty much combat sports. Those four things. And when people come to me and say, oh, I'm doing a powerlifting program or I'm doing a bodybuilding program, I'm like, cool. I love that. I love that you're lifting, first and foremost. Like nothing against powerlifting, bodybuilding, high rocks, whatever, maybe high rocks. But if we look at the goals that you've just expressed to me as a combat sports athlete, tell me how bodybuilding supports that. It probably supports one of those things. Tell me how powerlifting supports that. Probably supports one of those things. So you're not training specifically for your goals. And it is training like an athlete. It is training like a fighter because you need to like think about your goals and actually attack those with the training stimulus you put in place, which is your training. That's like, you want to make sure that the adaptations that you get out of your training are specific to what you're trying to accomplish. So you need to actually work on that, right? So pick a program that's specific to that. And generally speaking, and this is where there is an element of like, look, your training schedule based on how often you train, we can fuck around with this a little bit. It's not set in stone. But for the most part, full body training sessions are going to be the way for combat sports athletes because you can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. It doesn't absolutely batter your body to a point where you can't walk for 3 days. Now you've got to go do some Muay Thai sparring, get kicks in the legs and stuff. That's not ideal. So we don't want a solid leg day where you do 6 exercises for a few reasons. By the 6th exercise of that leg day, you're probably achieving fuck all but soreness anyway. Like, I don't think there's loads of adaptation potential in that, even for bodybuilding, to be honest, but definitely not for you guys. So you want to choose training schedules like a full body split that allows you to go in, stimulate the muscles, get like a strength adaptation, a power adaptation, whatever that thing is, and leave feeling decently fresh so that you can go and do your sport the next day, right? That's the most important thing. And it's where people get wrong. So within that training day, you're probably going to have some power work. You're probably going to have some compound lifting. You're going to move not just up and down. You're going to move forward. You're going to move laterally. You're going to bend. You're going to flex. You're going to extend. You're going to rotate. You're going to do all those things, and you might do some conditioning on top of that as well. So ultimately, when it comes down to like scheduling issues, is thinking about, is your training program actually geared towards improving your sports as a combat sports athlete? When you ask people that question, like if you, wherever you are, you're walking, you're on the bike, you're driving, does your training currently, is it pointing towards your goals? If it's not, we need to change it, or just be happy with the fact that you're not going to achieve your goals. And I sound like a wanker saying it, but it's like it's the obvious question that we need to ask. So scheduling issues, people get that wrong. Okay. You've got a busy life. Where do we fit things in? So you need to find ways. Okay. Think about your intensity management, like what your training week looks like. Think about managing your fatigue going into your big sessions, and then think about how your training schedule, your program, actually works. And generally speaking, we go off 2 to 3 full body sessions per week for a lot of combat sports athletes. There is exceptions to that. We have people that don't get on the mats as often. Therefore, we might do an upper lower full body. We might do upper lower. And this will also depend on what their secondary goals are. Like, for example, we've got a grappler do work with is trying to put on a lot of size. Okay, trying to put on a lot of size, and he's not on the mats very often at the moment because family stuff, right? He can't get to sessions. Therefore, let's get him in the gym loads, get him super strong, get him really big, work on his gas tank alongside that as well, whilst he's just kind of maintaining his mat volume. And then eventually, when he does start doing more mat work, we're going to bring him back onto the mat 3-4 times a week. And now he's going to be an absolute Hulk, right? So there is variation to that, but I almost don't want to explain that because I think some people then start to create excuses for how their training program is poor for their goals, right? You need to be very specific in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So that is the first thing, scheduling issues. Second one, right? The hobbyist combat sports athletes get wrong is they do not train for power, or they do not train for power properly. If you do a bit of power work, this is usually how I see it being done, okay? People throw it in a circuit, okay, which is a problem because when you throw power work into a circuit where you might do 30 seconds on of med ball slams, then box jumps, med ball punch throws, explosive press-ups, you're not achieving enough output in those exercises to really make an actual difference from a power perspective. When we're trying to improve power, when we look at the principles of improving power, what we need, super high intensity. Like the intent of the exercise needs to be 100%. Like if you're throwing a medicine ball against the wall in like a punch throw type of thing, it needs to be breaking that wall. That's what I need from you. Like it needs to be a PB throw every single time. You need to keep the reps low because we do not want fatigue. Whenever fatigue starts to creep in, when we're training power, you're not going to achieve 100% output. Therefore, you're not going to get it. Like the output will start to drop from 100% on the first rep to 99 to 98 to 95. And it's actually a lot faster of a drop off than that. But what you will see is for every subsequent rep, output drops down and you're not achieving high output. You're not improving power. So you doing 30 seconds of an exercise for a power exercise probably isn't doing what you think you're probably just creating fatigue, right? So we need to think about that. That is how a lot of people do it, to be honest, is circuit work. That's an issue, okay? So what I want you to do is change it to a point where instead of doing 5 exercises, you pick 2, right? And you can do them as a superset if you want to. So you could pick a pogo, okay, or a lower body power exercise and an upper body power exercise like, I don't know, an explosive press up, or actually doing an explosive press up with your hands on a bench. So you're elevating your hands a little bit, which is like going to be really good from a power perspective because there's going to be less weight going through your hands, which means you're going to be able to express a lot more speed, which means you're going to be closer to achieving a power stimulus. And that is what a lot of people also do wrong. When they go after power, they use exercises that are too slow, right? So doing an explosive press up on a box, fast, that's awesome. So what you could do then is at the start of your session, when you're fresh, do power at the start after you warm up, is you might do four sets, okay, of 3 reps on an explosive press up. You then might rest for 1 minute. You then might go into a lower body power exercise like a pogo, a pogo, a box jump, a counter movement jump, a drop jump, whatever. You might do 4 reps of that, and then you're going to rest for 3 minutes. And then you're going to do that for 3 or 4 times. And you're probably sat there thinking, fuck me, that's a long time to spend on 2 exercises. Yep, correct. Training power is uncomfortable, not because it's hard work, uncomfortable because it's forcing you to do what is right to get the most adaptation rather than grunt work, okay? And that is why people are not powerful. That is why people lose their edge year on year on year because they can't sit with the uncomfortable fact of training for power isn't always fun. It's a lot of sat around resting. And that makes it difficult. That makes it difficult to fit in a decent amount of power work in a busy training schedule if you're a combat sports athlete that's, managing life. I get it. But you can definitely find ways around this, okay? So that's what I would recommend. And look, if you're doing 3 combat sports sessions, if you're doing 3 S&C sessions per week, you're going to collect a good 6 exercises worth there. Another creative solution is potentially before you do your pad work, before you go to jiu-jitsu, get to gym a little bit early when it's been opened up, get warm and do some power work before you actually start your skill session. So that way it frees up some of your actual S&C time for lifting and a bit of conditioning, so we do that with a lot of our guys. We also tag on some rehab or some prehab stuff before they do their skill sessions as well. So yeah, that's another option for you, is do it before your skill stuff, and then you're just maximizing time. So yeah, power work, right? High intensity is what we need. We do not want fatigue. We do not want you out of breath. We probably do, honestly, a lot of the time, we probably don't even want you sweating, right? And that's not dead set, but because obviously environment and those types of things do impact how much you sweat with it. But the idea is high quality is what we need. That's the most important thing. As soon as you start putting out dog shit reps, just move on to the next exercise, because you're not improving power, you're just getting tired. So with power then, just to give a quick backstory, not every combat sports athlete will need to train power to the same degree. If you are a striking athlete, okay, so let's take boxing, for example, power is going to be a really important part, because ultimately when we throw a punch, we are, it is an expression of power. We're trying to transmit force from the ankle, through the knee, through the hip, through the torso, into the fist to then land it on an opponent. That is a powerful action. It is a very ballistic sport. It's a very fast sport. Therefore, training power in that way is important. Okay. Let's look at the other side of it. Jiu-jitsu. Okay. Gi jiu-jitsu. Slow. Really slow sport. There will be fast elements of it, like there might be random scrambles, there might be takedowns, there might be stuff like that. But generally speaking, when we look at the majority of the sport, it's isometric, it's slow, it's pressure. There isn't a lot of power required for most people. And obviously everyone plays the game slightly different. Look at, Gordon Ryan, right? There's a clip the other day, which was awesome, of John Danaher basically saying that Gordon Ryan's speed is, what did he say, pathetically unimpressive or something like that. You'd have to kill him or try and kill him. Is obviously a serial killer in some way, as a beast. But everyone plays the game differently, so you can be the GOAT of the sport without power. That's to illustrate that. However, I still like to get our jiu-jitsu, our grapplers, doing some power work. One, because I think it's really good from an athleticism standpoint, and I generally notice that a lot of hobbyists are not super athletic. Okay, I think they're missing that edge. So if we can give you a little bit of power, ability to move fast in a variety of ways, I think that gives you the edge over training partners. I think that allows you to get to positions faster, and you won't die off as quick. As well as having elements of power work, I do think serves a really good purpose from an injury prevention standpoint, because I do think a lot of injuries that do happen at speed, right? And when they happen at speed in these scrambles, and you're having to, almost catch an opponent's body weight as they run into you from the side, and those types of positions, having the ability for your central nervous system, so your brain, to switch on and absorb that force and isometrically control it and eccentrically control it, I think is super important, because then you get rid of a lot of the risk of tears and muscle damage and those types of things. So if your brain can basically move at a faster rate, it can compute things better. I think that's a really good thing from an injury prevention standpoint. So even if you're a grappler, which is a slow sport, still doing some power work is important, but you're probably not going to do as much as Muay Thai or boxing or MMA, right? Because the sports are different. So even though I'm bucketing combat sports together for the most part with a lot of our content, there is key differences, and you should train differently fundamentally. So power work, okay? Kind of mentioned there, don't do it in a circuit. If you are going to do it in a circuit, we need rest to be super important on it. Choose a mixture of upper body and lower body exercises, super important. Keep intent high. You want to rest a lot. And as soon as your output drops, or you become suddenly disinterested in doing any more power work, you probably need to stop. Cool. So there's two: scheduling issues and power. Finally, another thing that hobbyist combat sports athletes get wrong about training for their sport is their conditioning work does not suit the needs of what they're trying to improve. So let's break this down a little bit. If I was going to give a sweeping generalization to what a lot of combat sports athletes do, is they will do a lot of circuits, just random circuits. Let's pick some exercises that get me absolutely gasping for air and doing just, burpees into rower, into sprints and that type of thing. Okay. Or you might go on steady long runs and just box off that and be like, cool, right, I've done my fitness work. You will get a bit fitter to a point, right? You're going to improve fitness, but it's random ultimately. Like what a lot of people get wrong is they don't program their energy system work or their conditioning work to the same degree as they will their strength, their power. Okay. But why? Like conditioning is probably one of the things that a lot of athletes could benefit from the most. Of just really making a big difference there is going to mean that your skill work is going to be more efficient for longer into the session. So you're not going to get into the last quarter of the session and just be hanging on for dear life, just showcasing shit skills. You're going to recover better between rounds, recover better between training sessions. So improving your conditioning is like huge. So I would definitely recommend that you do it. So if we're really trying to improve something, let's write it down. Let's make sure it's logical. Let's make sure that we're being specific and individualized to that person. So we know what your start point is and we know what we're trying to work towards. Just going and doing a CrossFit WOD or a random high rock session or just going on a jog, right? It's better than nothing. Of course, it's better than nothing, unless, going back to our first point, it really kind of puts some spanners in the works as far as scheduling issues where you're just creating back-to-back red days, right? Obviously. But coming back to this, doing something is cool. Like I'm not here to stop you from doing work, but I want to make it more efficient. That's my role, right? I want to make you get more returns for your work. So simply put, what I would try and do is let me give you a few recommendations of improving how you schedule or how you actually program your conditioning work. So if you know your resting heart rate, okay, so you look at you've got a Whoop strap, you've got an Apple Watch, whatever. If your resting heart rate is above 58 beats per minute, okay, if it's above that, then I want you to lean into doing a little bit more steady state central adaptation based work. So what I mean by central adaptations is heart and lung focus work. Generally speaking, we improve that quality because it's like foundation fitness is your base fitness with the longer, steadier, not super intense work. That's your zone twos. That's your go and do a 5K with a friend and be able to have a conversation. It's get on a bike for 45 minutes and watch a Netflix episode, right? So central adaptations benefit from reps, honestly, of just stride, nothing too quick, nothing too intense. It's high volume, low intensity, central adaptation. So if your resting heart rate is above 58, I want you to lean into, with whatever conditioning sessions you've got available for a little while, into collecting some of that work for about 4 weeks. Okay. Once you've done 4 weeks of it, recheck. Okay. Is my heart rate below that? Awesome. Okay. Once you've done that, what that basically tells us is your heart and your cardiovascular system, your aerobic fitness is decent. Like we've got a decent ability. We've got a good fuel tank, right? We've got a decent sized fuel tank, which is efficient. We can pump blood well, right? Now, what we're going to start to think about is how can we improve our muscles' ability, which is the end product, to produce power, produce force, and use that oxygen that's taken from the heart. Okay, so the heart is the fuel tank, and the muscles is like the engine, right, of the car. It's all great having an amazing fuel tank, super economic. But if we've got an engine that's like piss poor and just has no ability to actually generate any real speed or vroom vroom, then that doesn't suit us very well in combat sports. So the way that we actually, improve the muscles ability, muscle fitness, ability for it to like work hard is leaning into peripheral adaptations. Peripheral adaptations is muscle focused. It's what's actually happening in the muscle fiber and how well we use that oxygen, right? The way we train for it is we basically flip the central adaptation loading parameters on its head. So instead of it being high volume, low intensity for our central adaptations, it's the opposite. It's low volume, high intensity. It's sprint. It's super hard. Get after it. It's gut wrenching. You're going to dread it. It's going to feel minging, right? And I say this, like I emphasize all those words because it's genuinely really hard work. Like I know we all say we lean into hard work, but my God, after last year, I did a lot of sprint interval work and a variety of it leading into some comps. And by the end of it, I genuinely could not bear the thought of getting on that watt bike or the assault bike again. It was tough. But ultimately, the sessions that you will be looking at doing are, like 30 seconds on, 60 seconds off, 2 reps. Low volume, like really low volume. So that 30 seconds on times 2, it is, imagine somebody's got a gun to your head. And if you do not hit a PB or your intensity drops below 100%, you're dead, right? That's what we want from it. Like, it's got to be everything. Otherwise, if you give half-assed effort on a 30-second interval, you're doing low volume, low intensity, like you're doing nothing, right? So it's got to be high intensity. So you could do that 3 times a week. Okay, you could play around with the sessions a little bit. You could do 10 seconds on, 40 seconds off, and collect 60 seconds of work in that way. So 10 seconds times 6, 40 seconds rest in between. You could do 30, you could do 20. But if I had to give you some recommendations, do 30 on, 60 off times 2, do that for 4 weeks and see where you are. At least twice per week, but ideally aim for 3. We call it a repeated win gate. So what you've got there is like 2 different approaches, just a quick rule of thumb that you can think about with your training right now. Is my heart rate below 58, resting heart rate? If it is, great. Do some peripheral work, do high intensity work, and really maximize my muscles' ability to use my good low resting heart rate. If my heart rate is above that, let's think about a little bit more steadier state and see if we can lean into getting that resting heart rate down, because that is going to be indicative of a good aerobic system. There are some caveats to this, some things to think about if you are somebody that is carrying a lot of weight, okay, whether you're just generally a big individual, maybe your body fat's a little bit higher, your resting heart rate might be naturally higher, okay. Well, equally, if you're trying to really maximize your performance from a combat sports perspective anyway, we could probably do with making sure that our body composition is in a good place. The second thing is things like asthma. We work with a jiu-jitsu guy who does have asthma, and we've actually found that by getting him fitter, shock, that his asthma is greatly reduced. And actually, we found doing more sprint interval work, so peripheral adaptation work, has really impacted his asthma in a positive way. But if we think about this, right, and I did not come up with this is not my brainchild. I did a mentorship with a guy called Andrew Usher, and he spoke about this, and I was like, this makes a lot of fucking sense. Asthma impacts the respiratory system, so your ability to get oxygen in and through the chain, right, get in. We're going to make changes. We're going to make differences to your asthma, but you're always going to be a little bit hindered. You might always be 90% of what you could be because of that asthma. Who knows, right? Just random, but you are hindered. So instead of focusing more on the central adaptations, maybe we just make the muscles more efficient at dealing with the oxygen that it can have. And I'm like, that makes so much sense when you say it. So with this guy, we did loads of sprint intervals. We did your 30 seconds. We're currently on those now. Attack them. And honestly, I train with him at our gym. He's a nightmare. He's a fucking nightmare to roll with because his pace is insane and he just doesn't die off. And that's a total difference from where he was 6 months ago before we started working together, where he had to have his inhaler, definitely between rounds, and sometimes did after. I might be making this up, but I'm sure I saw him like having to stop occasionally because his asthma was giving him some grief. So all that to say, conditioning work. Approach it systematically, right? Don't just do random stuff. Don't just go and run a 5K for the sake of running a 5K. Make it fit for purpose, because the way that people get the fastest results is not from just working hard. Like, we all know that from like a combat sports perspective anyway. When is ever just going into a spar or a round and just being like, I'm going to grunt work this, ever done you any good? Because then you'll get some black belt or some 15-year-old that's been training for 20 years that'll just piece you up because they're technically better and they're smarter. Same thing with S&C, right? Working hard's important. You've got to do that. But smart is probably going to be the thing that really kind of trumps it. Cool. So all this to say, let me recap those points just so you've got them. Okay. Scheduling issues, things that people get wrong. You're busy, right? So we need to make sure that it's efficient. Manage your intensity, look at your training week. If there's too much red going on or all your sessions are hard, that is an issue. You need to change that before your injury changes that for you. Make sure your fatigue's on point so that you're maximizing the most important sessions of the week, whether that is S&C sessions are the most important sessions of the week. For some people it is, particularly if you're in a physical block, or if it's sparring. I would avoid bodybuilding splits, powerlifting splits, CrossFit programming, anything that it doesn't allow you to really run into your goals of improving your performance as a combat sports athlete that has power, speed, moving in a variety of ways, rotation, strength, and conditioning at the heart of your goals, which you probably should. You then want to think about power, okay? Super high intent. That is what we need from you. We don't want loads of reps. We don't want loads of fatigue. We want loads of rest time. And we want exercises that allow you to achieve a good, powerful stimulus like jumps, throws, maybe Olympic weightlifting. Those are your ones, right? And then thinking about your specific needs as a conditioning standpoint, okay? I gave you a quick rule of thumb, and look, there will be times when that doesn't work and we need to be a little bit more specific with it. But just for the sake of a podcast, when I'm trying to reach hundreds of people at once and give them something they can take away, use your resting heart rate as a guide. Above 58, do some conditioning, low, steady state, zone 2, 30 to 45 minutes per session. Do 2 of those a week. If your heart rate is lower than that, change those 2 or 3 steady state sessions into high intensity sprint interval, get after it type work, and see how you go. It does take a little bit of time to see conditioning adaptations come to fruition, but about 4 weeks, I think you'll start to be like, oh, okay, I feel this. And look, with all this, if you have any questions, drop me a message on Instagram. That's probably where I'm the most responsive. If you have any people on your team at your club that you think could benefit from this podcast episode, send it over to them. I always appreciate people helping this podcast grow. That's basically how it grows anyway, is like word of mouth. And I've been fucking buzzing with it, to be honest. Like, people are sharing this a lot, and it's cool. It makes it worth it, because look, talking to yourself in front of a screen is not always easy, but hopefully it's been valuable for you. Sick. And then final shout out, if you are a combat sports athlete that's looking for S&C coaching, give us a shout. All right. I'll give you a quick talk through on how it works. And if we're a fit, we'll move forward with it. Cool. Any questions, guys? Send it over. Okay, that is the end of today's episode, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, please do let us know, and then share it with somebody who may find this episode interesting. Okay, see you next time. Cheers.